My stepmother set a moving box on the kitchen counter, right next to my toast, and told me I had until the end of the month to be out of my own house. That's how she put it too. My house, even though her name had never once been on a single document tied to that property. I just looked at the box. It was one of those cheap ones from the U-Haul store on Route 9, still flat folded, like she hadn't even bothered to put it together before deciding this was happening. My father was at work. My stepbrother, Derek, was upstairs, probably still asleep at 11 in the morning, the way he always was when he didn't have anywhere to be, which was most days. "Did you hear me, Megan?" she said. "Derek and his girlfriend need a place. They're having a baby. You're 32 years old. It's time." I want to tell you I had some clever line ready, something sharp and satisfying, but the truth is, I just sat there with a piece of toast going cold in my hand and felt that very specific kind of stillness that comes right before you understand you're about to lose something you thought was safe. I'd felt it before, a long time ago, when my mom got sick. I recognized it instantly, the way you recognize a smell from childhood. "I'm not going anywhere, Carol," I said. She laughed. Not a real laugh. The kind people do when they want you to know they think you're being ridiculous. "You don't have a choice, sweetheart. This house needs a real family in it. Derek's starting a family. You're just—" She stopped herself, but I knew where that sentence was going. She'd said it before, in pieces, over years. Freeloader. Deadweight. The single one. The one who didn't matter as much. I stood up, rinsed my plate, and went to my room. I didn't argue. I'd learned a long time ago that arguing with Carol was like trying to negotiate with a closed door. You just end up tired and the door's still closed. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, not even my father, not really, was that the house she was standing in, the one she'd just informed me I needed to vacate by the end of the month so my stepbrother could play house with his girlfriend, belonged to me. Every wall, every inch of the yard. The garage Derek used to store his motorcycle he never rode, all of it, mine, had been for almost 2 years. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the part that came before it. My mom died when I was 26. Pancreatic cancer, the fast kind, the kind that gives you 4 months to get used to an idea you'll never actually get used to. My dad remarried Carol about 18 months after that, which felt fast to me at the time, though I tried not to say so out loud, because grief makes people do things on a clock that doesn't match anyone else's. Carol came with Derek, a son from her first marriage who was 28 at the time, and had never, in all the years I've known him, held a job longer than 9 months. The house was my mother's before it was anyone's. She'd inherited it from her own parents. A modest 3-bedroom in a town outside Hartford, Connecticut. Nothing fancy, but paid off free and clear by the time I was in high school, because my grandparents had been the kind of people who treated a mortgage like a debt to be murdered as fast as possible. When my mom passed, the house went to my dad, since they'd never bothered updating the will after she got sick, and things moved too fast for lawyers and paperwork to keep up with reality. I moved back in around that time too, technically to help my dad, who was a mess, who forgot to eat some days, who left her cardigans hanging by the door for almost a year because he couldn't bring himself to move them. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd get my own place once things settled. Things never really settled. They just got replaced with new things. Carol moving in 2 rooms over, redecorating my mother's kitchen within 4 months of the wedding, putting Derek in what used to be my mom's sewing room like it was nothing. I paid rent the whole time. Not because anyone asked. My dad never would have, he's not that kind of man, but because I didn't want to feel like a guest in the house I grew up in, and because, if I'm honest, paying my way felt like the only language Carol respected. $800 a month, every month, on the first, like clockwork, for almost 6 years. I covered groceries half the time. I paid for the roof when it started leaking in 2022 because my dad's pension from the Postal Service doesn't stretch the way it used to. And Carol made it clear in about 4 different ways that she wasn't about to dip into her savings for his house. Here's the thing nobody in that family understood about my dad. He's a quiet man. Quietly proud, quietly ashamed, quietly drowning sometimes, and never once said a word about it. About 2.5 years ago, he came to me on a Tuesday night while Carol was at her sister's for the weekend. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table Carol set that moving box down next to, and told me, in a voice I'd never heard him use before, that he'd taken out a home equity loan against the house 4 years earlier to cover some bad investments a buddy of his had talked him into, and that the loan was underwater, and that he was 2 missed payments away from the bank starting foreclosure proceedings. He hadn't told Carol. He was terrified of what it would do to her, to the marriage, to whatever fragile piece he thought he'd built in his second chance at a life. I'm a CPA. I work for a mid-sized firm in Hartford, mostly handling small business accounts and a couple of high-net-worth individuals. And I'd spent 6 years quietly putting away every dollar I could from a salary that wasn't glamorous but wasn't nothing either, because I'd never fully shaken the instinct my mother gave me. The one that says nothing in this life is permanent, so build something solid while you can. I had savings. Not a fortune, but enough. I sat with my dad that night and we went through the numbers. The loan balance, plus what he still owed on a second smaller line of credit he'd also kept quiet, came to just under $90,000. I paid it off in full over the following 4 months, working with the bank directly, and in exchange, because I wasn't about to hand over that kind of money with nothing to show for it, and because my dad insisted, practically begged, that it be done properly. He had the deed transferred into my name. Full legal transfer, done through an actual real estate attorney, recorded with the county. My name on the title, his name off it entirely. He asked me not to tell Carol. I think some part of him hoped he'd never have to. I think some part of him believed that if he just kept being agreeable, kept being invisible in his own house, the whole thing would stay quiet forever. That's the kind of man my father is. He'll absorb anything to avoid a fight, so I let it stay quiet. I kept paying my $800 a month like nothing had changed, because I didn't want Carol asking questions before I was ready for her to have answers, and because, honestly, some petty part of me liked knowing something she didn't. I'm not proud of that. I'm also not going to pretend it isn't true. And then came the box on the counter. I spent that whole week in a strange, flat kind of calm. I went to work. I came home. I made dinner sometimes, and Carol made little comments at the table about fresh starts and how Derek's girlfriend, Brianna, was due in March, and they'd need the bigger bedroom. My bedroom, the one I'd slept in since I was 9 years old, converted into a nursery. My dad sat through these conversations the way he sits through everything, nodding, not quite meeting my eyes, refilling his water glass like it required his full concentration. On a Thursday night, Carol cornered me in the hallway outside the bathroom and told me she'd already looked up listings for a one-bedroom apartment over on Forest Street, and that it was actually pretty affordable for someone in my position, like she was doing me a favor by researching my own eviction. I found a sweet little place, she said. Small, but you don't need much space. It's not like you've got a family to think about. That landed exactly the way she meant it to. I've never married. There was someone years back, but it didn't work out, and Carol has never once let an opportunity pass to point that out sideways, dressed up as concern. I appreciate you thinking of me, I said, and went into the bathroom and locked the door and stood there for a minute just breathing, because I needed a second before I did what I was about to do. I called the attorney who'd handled the deed transfer the next morning from my car in the office parking lot. I asked her to overnight me a certified copy of the recorded deed, just to have it in hand, official letterhead and county stamp and all of it. It arrived Saturday. I put it in a manila folder and left it on the kitchen table Sunday morning, right where Carol always sat with her coffee and her crossword. I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I want to be clear about that, because I know how this sounds. I just didn't see the point in saying it out loud when I could simply let the paper speak for itself. She found it around 8:15. I was in the backyard ostensibly checking on the gutters, actually just needing somewhere else to stand. I heard the screen door bang open behind me. What is this? Not a question. Her voice had a flatness to it I'd never heard before, like she was reading words off a page that didn't make sense yet. It's the deed to the house, I said. You found the folder. Why does it have your name on it? Still flat. Still not quite landing. Because 2.5 years ago, Dad came to me, because the bank was about to foreclose on this place, and I paid off what he owed, and in exchange he signed the house over to me. It's legal. It's recorded with the county. You can call the assessor's office Monday if you want to confirm it yourself. I watched her face do something I can only describe as a kind of structural failure. Carol has never, in the years I've known her, been at a loss for words. She talks over people at Thanksgiving. She talks over the television. In that moment, standing on the back steps in her robe with a folder shaking slightly in her hand, she didn't have a single word ready. Your father wouldn't do that, she finally said. He wouldn't do that without telling me. He did, I said. Ask him. She went inside. I heard raised voices through the kitchen window for the better part of 20 minutes. Hers mostly, his in short, defeated bursts, the sound of a man finally admitting something he'd been carrying alone for years. I stayed in the yard. There's a particular kind of mercy in not watching someone's whole understanding of their life rearrange itself in real time, and I figured my father had earned at least that much privacy, even from me. What followed over the next several days was frankly a circus. Carol called her sister, who apparently has opinions about real estate law despite having none of the relevant credentials, and who called me directly to inform me that what I'd done was ethically questionable, coercing a vulnerable older man during a moment of weakness. I let her finish. Then I asked her, calmly, if she thought it was more ethically questionable to quietly let a man lose the house his late wife's parents had paid off with 30 years of careful saving, or to step in and save it. She didn't have an answer for that, either. People rarely do, once you take away the emotional shorthand and make them look at the actual facts. Derek called me on day 3. This was the conversation I'd been bracing for, honestly, because Derek has always operated on the assumption that charm gets him out of anything. He opened with how sorry he was that things had gotten messy, how he understood I was probably feeling some kind of way, how none of this was personal. Then, smooth as anything, he pivoted into how Brianna was due in 10 weeks, and they really did need the space, and here's where I almost laughed out loud into the phone, maybe I could just stay in the smaller room for now while they took the master, just until they got on their feet. Derek, I said, you're asking me to give up the master bedroom of the house I own, so that you and your girlfriend, who I've met exactly 4 times, can have more closet space. He didn't have a comeback for that. Nobody in that family, I was starting to realize, had ever once been asked to actually hear the things they were saying out loud. I went back into the house properly on the 5th day, not to fight, but because I was done tiptoeing around my own kitchen, like a house guest who'd overstayed a welcome that was never really mine to overstay. Carol was at the table. My dad was across from her, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, the way people do when a weight they've carried alone finally gets set down where everyone can see it. I sat down. I told them I had no intention of putting anyone out on the street, that I wasn't my stepmother, that cruelty wasn't a language I was interested in learning even after years of being on the receiving end of it. I told them Derek and Brianna were welcome to find their own place, and that I'd even help them with the security deposit if money was the real issue, because I understood what it was to be starting out with not much. But I told them the house wasn't up for negotiation, that my name was on it because I'd put my own money into keeping it standing, and that from here on out, decisions about who lived in it and where would go through me. Carol didn't speak for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Your mother's house," like she was only just now hearing the words for what they actually meant, after years of treating that house like something that had simply appeared for her benefit. "My mother's house," I said, "and now mine." She didn't cry, not exactly, but something in her face cracked open in a way I hadn't seen before. Not the practiced kind of upset she'd used on my father for years to get her way, but something that looked almost like recognition, like she was finally doing the math on 6 years of $800 checks, and a leaking roof, and a stepdaughter she'd never once thought to actually ask about. I set 2 conditions before I left that table. First, that the word freeloader, or any version of it, never got used in that house again by anyone about anyone. Second, that Derek find his own place within 60 days. Reasonable time, not punitive, but real. My father agreed before I'd even finished the sentence. Carol took 4 days to come around, which honestly was faster than I expected. Derek and Brianna found a 2-bedroom in Manchester about 6 weeks later. I did help with part of the deposit, because I meant what I said, and because the baby, when she came, deserved a stable start that had nothing to do with the mess her father's pride had almost made of mine. These days I still live in that house. I repainted the kitchen a soft sage green my mother always wanted and never got around to. Carol and I aren't close, not in any warm sense of the word, but she knocks now before she walks into a room, and she's stopped referring to anything in that house as hers. My father sleeps better, I think. He told me so once, almost in passing, like it cost him something to say it. Every morning I make coffee in my mother's kitchen, in the house her parents worked their whole lives to pay off, the house I worked years to keep standing, and I let it go warm in my hands before I drink it, because for the first time in a long time, I'm not in a hurry to be anywhere else.